Well, let's talk about Chapter 8, the Introduction to Contracts, Classifications, Terminology, and Formation. It has kind of a funny little story. You can read it if you look up the PowerPoint online there instead of me pausing for too long there. So this is, I'll tell you what, while this is kind of funny and meant to be, it's also a good example of what often goes wrong with contracts. Misinterpretation of language, thoughts, descriptions, whatever the case may be. That's probably what happens to cause contracts to go upside down. I mean, other than breach of performance, when there's disagreements about contracts, it's often because of those things, some of the ambiguities in them. So a contract involves a promise, right, or an exchange of promises, and it can be either to do something or not to do something. So you can agree not to do this, right? Contracts, a lot of settlements, for example, have contracts. A company that maybe caused some harm, right, may settle with the person to whom the harm was caused, and as a part of that, it would be an agreement not to sue, right? Or it can be an agreement then not to go public, not to talk about those things. So contract doesn't have to be in writing. There are some exceptions, and I don't think in this chapter, but I think when we get into other chapters, we've talked about real estate already, and those contracts do have to be in writing for the transfer or exchange of real estate. It can be a promise to perform or not to perform. Basically, we've said it is legally enforceable. Okay, and contracts definitely improve buyer-seller relationships. And remember, a lot of contracts are not written. Okay, and yet it still improves the buyer-seller relationship. And just the fact that we do have a solid contract law, makes a lot of that possible. So much of this happens all the time, and we're just really unaware of it because it just kind of happens. You go to fill up with gas, technically it's if something went awry with that transaction, it would be contract law is the law that you would use to settle that, okay? And yet you may not even see the guy at the gas station, right? You go out, put your card in, and away you go. So, but technically that's contract law. It can come from either legislation, statutory, right, law. Uniform Commercial Code is an example that's been adopted by all 50 states. This deals with contracts for goods, okay? Now, common law are judges' decisions, right, precedents and whatnot, oftentimes for contracts for other than goods, maybe services, employment contracts, those types of things, right? Oftentimes it's judges' decisions that have made contract law that affects that. So the classifications, we got bilateral, unilateral, express, implied in fact, and implied in law. And we talk about each of these as we go forward individually, so I won't spend much time here. In fact, we jump right into bilateral, right? A bilateral is a promise for a promise. So this is probably the most common, right? It's a simple transaction. You go to the car dealer, I'll pay you $35,000 for that used Cadillac, and the dealer agrees. You have a contract. You've made a promise to pay money. They've made a promise to provide you with a vehicle. Okay, so you have a contract. It could be even as simple as buying the cup of coffee at the coffee store. Okay, a lot smaller amount, and you don't think of it. In the vehicle, you're probably going to write it up, right? Well, let's go in and write it up. Okay, and you do that because it's more expensive. Probably there's no need to write it up. You could do that without any kind of a written agreement. But you do that when you buy coffee then too. In the morning, you give the coffee person $3 and they give you a cup of coffee. It's a rip-off, by the way. There you go. That's technically a contract, just like the car one was. So unilateral contract is a promise for a performance. And probably the best example here I'd give you is just a reward, right? So it's an open-ended contract, maybe we could call it too, where I'll pay you $100 for the return of my lost dog. Okay, something to that effect. So it's a reward for some performance that might happen, and it's open-ended because it could be for anybody really. Okay, I suppose you could specify, a person. Okay, but it's a contract for performance, and as soon as the performance is done, right, then the other party has to pay. Okay, so there's not necessarily an agreed upon, Cindy doesn't say, absolutely, I'm going to do that. Okay, it's just kind of left open, and if Cindy does it, or, like I said in that example, it could be any of 1,000 people that might actually perform the contract, then Chuck, whatever, would be obligated to pay them. Yeah, let's stop right there, and we'll finish that in part 2, or not finish, but we'll move on to part 2.